So thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Kathy Waller. I am a U of R graduate, class of 1980 and class of 1983 with the Simon School. I'm also on the board of trustees for the university. As you are all aware, this speaker series was inspired by Jerry Gardner, U of R graduate class from the classes of 1958 and 1965, and a life trustee for the college. Jerry recruited me, and he recruited Carl Grant, who is class of 1990 and also serves as the Atlanta Alumni Network leader. He recruited us to work with him on this speaker series. So we wanted to better understand systemic racism and how it not only manifests itself in our Atlanta community, but we wanted to learn more about the people and organizations who work to eliminate systemic racism and address the impact it has on the daily lives of so many people in our community. So for tonight's program, we are excited to welcome Terica Redfield Gansey. Terica is Executive Director of the Southern Center for Human Rights, where she leads the team in conducting its mission to dramatically transform the criminal legal system through direct representation, impact litigation, policy advocacy, and public education. She and her team believe in justice and accountability and are working toward a world where the legal system works for everyone. Prior to becoming the center's executive director, Terica served in several different roles, most recently as deputy director, helping to coordinate the center's strategy and programs. She has served as development director, designing and leading the center's development strategy and building strategic partnerships. And then for 9 years, Terica served as staff attorney in the center's capital litigation unit, where her work focused on representing clients on death row in Georgia and Alabama. For 5 years, she also served as the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers Death Penalty Resource Center Counsel, providing training and resources to capital defense attorneys throughout the nation. Terica received her JD from the University of Virginia School of Law and her Master of Laws degree, specializing in trial advocacy from Temple University Beasley School of Law. She received a BA in English and Humanities, summa cum laude, from Tougaloo College, and received a certificate in nonprofit management and social enterprise from Georgia State University's Andrew Young School of Public Policy. Terica is admitted to practice law in North Carolina, Alabama, and Georgia. She's also admitted to the Georgia Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court of Georgia, and the United States Supreme Court. Terica is a member of Leadership Atlanta, class of 2022, a graduate of Leadership Clayton, a member of the 2015 class of the Georgia Center for Nonprofits, High Potential Diverse Leaders, a 2014 New Leaders Council Fellow, and a graduate of Georgia Win-List Leadership Academy. She serves as Vice President of the Center for Death Penalty Litigation's Board of Directors, as mentoring co-chair for the Atlanta chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, and as Vice President of the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys. Terica also serves as Vice President of the State Bar of Georgia's Professionalism Committee and as a member of the State Bar's Seeking Equal Justice and Addressing Racism and Racial Bias Committee. And she's also a member of the Judicial Council of Georgia's Access to Justice Committee. This is one busy woman, truly an expert about racial inequality in the legal system, and she is on the front lines of this issue. I am also very fortunate to be Terica's 2022 Leadership Atlanta classmate, and we are all fortunate to have her join us tonight. Terica, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
When I started preparing for tonight's discussion, I started by looking at your website, the center's website. And it is absolutely a wealth of information. And there are a number of different directions this conversation could go in. And you and I have had many conversations as being part of Leadership Atlanta. So let's start with defining human rights. So I found this definition that said that human rights are basic rights and freedoms that belong to every person in the world from birth to death, regardless of race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Okay. How do you think about human rights?
I would agree with that statement. Excuse me. Allergies are
Allergies.
getting the best of me. But I would agree with that in terms of the way we see it at the Southern Center for Human Rights. So we try to lift up those things in the criminal legal system. So, some people can look at the name of our organization, Southern Center for Human Rights, and think of a lot of different things that fall under the umbrella of human rights. But ours is very specific to the criminal legal system. And so what we try to do is enforce and lift up the humanity of people who come in contact with the criminal legal system, because so often we tend to throw people away. We will lock them up in jails and prisons, and they can experience horrific conditions, including, I can't even begin to name some of the things, but rats and roaches, and feeding folks spoiled and moldy food, and the violence, where we've seen a real apathy towards violence. Towards safety for people who are incarcerated, and so people end up coming out more traumatized than they were when they came in, if they are allowed to come out. And so the Southern Center kind of got started really in outrage. Back in 1976, we were founded by a group of lawyers and activists and clergy people who were outraged really at the conditions that people were being incarcerated in, particularly in Mississippi's Parchman Farm prison. But we also were founded after the death penalty was reinstated, because we feel like the death penalty is a huge human rights violation, to the extent that the government feels it appropriate to take a person's life. I don't know that there can be a bigger human rights violation. And so we got to start challenging those injustices, because we wanted to uplift that people are human beings and they should be treated as such, not like animals, not worse than animals. And so that's where we define our, how we sort of find our niche in this human rights continuum. We specifically try to lift up the humanity of people who are in contact with the criminal legal system.
So a couple of interesting things. You said not like animals. The animals I see are treated quite well. The animal I know personally is treated incredibly well. So, maybe if they were treated like animals, they'd be better off, as opposed to how
we've said many times, that sometimes people treat horses better than they treat human beings, and why is that acceptable? And that's not to say that animals should be abused, right, but I do think that we have to, as human beings, we have to care about each other. We have to care about our the way that we can grow and learn and evolve, but also to try not to other each other to the extent that we can dismiss each other's humanity. And I think that's what typically happens in the criminal legal system. At least that's been my experience.
So you talked about throwing people away. So on your website, you and in Leadership Atlanta, we've talked about this concept of criminalizing poverty. Okay, so can you explain for what that means and how it manifests itself?
Yes. So when we talk about the criminalization of poverty, what we're really talking about is how the legal system sort of punishes people for being poor. So, for example, we have had a client who was homeless, unhoused, and he was standing on the street with a sign that said, "Homeless, please help." That act was a violation of an ordinance. He was arrested for it, thrown in jail, and could not pay the $200 fine to get out. And so he languished in jail for months. And so that is an example of the way that the law sort of is oppressive, can be oppressive to people without financial means. There are a number of other ways that other examples of people who where a person like you or I, good jobs, etc. If I got a traffic ticket, for example, I could pay it and move on with my life. It wouldn't matter, that wouldn't affect whether or not I could pay my light bill. It wouldn't affect whether or not I could pay my rent or a mortgage, that kind of thing. But the way our system is set up is that same fine for you or me is the same fine that somebody living below poverty would get. And so those folks would have a much harsher experience with the legal system than you or I would, because the odds are they wouldn't be able to pay the fine, and then they tack on interest and they tack on fees. And in Georgia, for example, traffic offenses are criminal offenses. And so you can end up on probation, having a private probation company monitor you, and then you have to pay for them to monitor you. And then they may ask you for drug tests. For example, we had a woman, an elderly lady, who I think her issue was that she had an expired tag or something like that. And so she got fined for it. She could not pay it. She ended up having to do a bake sale. She did whatever she could to try to raise money to pay the fines, but each month that she couldn't pay it, there were additional fees being tacked on. But that same woman might be subjected to a random drug test. It makes no sense, but she would also be forced to pay for that drug test. And so that's what we mean when we say the criminalization of poverty, when it is you are treated worse for having low income than you would be had you been middle class or upper class or any other class rank.
Wow. So many sad stories out there for just people who are already having difficulty, much less, the other situations they find themselves in. So a few other concepts that I'd like for people to understand. We talk about the privatization of the prison system, right? And people don't understand why that would be a problem. So can you help people can conceptualize why that might be a problem?
Well, I think anytime you treat human beings the same way you treat like a Coca-Cola or something, then that can be a problem. When profit is the motive for a prison, then the odds are they are going to do the things that reap the most profit, which might mean less staffing than they should have in terms of keeping people safe while incarcerated, lower amounts of food and lower quality food that is served to people there, lack of access to resources like medical care, etc. Because if the motive is profit, then profit sort of can trump everything. And sometimes that also often means that it also trumps humanity, it trumps dignity, it trumps equality, it trumps justice. And so that is the main reason why private prisons are problematic, because I don't think we should be having a profit motive around our justice system.
All right. Wow. And then we've also talked about the pipeline to prison, right?
Yeah.
Can you help people understand what that means when we talk about a pipeline to prison?
Well, I think it means a lot of things. And it's hard to talk about this without mentioning race. So the way that because racism is such a huge factor in the way our society works, has such an impact on it. And I'm not saying that people are racist, but I think a white supremacist system is sort of perpetuated throughout our country, and we're all victims of it, right? We're all come with certain biases that have been taught to us over generations. And so you see things like discipline in schools that is racially different. It's just different, where a little Black kid, and then there have been studies that have shown this, where little Black children, even as young as preschool age, are disciplined more harshly than white children, if misbehavior of a Black child is seen as more criminal than misbehavior of a white child. And so the punishments are different. We had a case in our office where a little Black girl wrote the word "hi" on another student's shoe. Actually, there were two girls involved, but the Black girl is the one who was prosecuted criminally for that act. And so when you think about the consequences of petty things like that being made criminal, then that sort of follows that child for the rest of her educational career. She's put in tracked in different learning groups, etc. And so things like that, where we create systems that sort of criminalize children, and we fail to provide the resources that communities need, one, to keep children in school and keep them safe. That sort of leads to a level of being able of sort of pushing children into the prison system. And none of us would say that was the original intent around it, but when you take away resources, when you kick children out of school for doing things that children do, then and they have nothing else to do with themselves, then you're sort of setting them up for failure. And so those are some of the things that you think about when we think about creating the pipeline to prison. You know, I often tell people, I have this dream that I'm gonna write children's books, because when I used to actively represent people on death row, I always say, it's late, it's too late right now, right? Because when the person comes to me, the state is already trying to kill them, and somebody else has already lost their lives. Where could we have done the interventions before now to prevent this? And so, in lots of the cases that we see, so many of these children who started out with babies, lots of hope. I like to talk about just thinking about a little baby you saw at a parade, or mama's arms at the park, and you don't think, oh, that kid is going to be a killer, or that kid is going to be this terrible thing. You think there's hope for that child. And then there are a series of things that happen to that kid, series of interventions that don't happen to that kid, that will sort of lead them on to the path of that would have them ending up needing my services, basically. And I think about all the places in that kid's life where one person could have made a difference, whether it was a teacher who said, I believe in you and I'm going to stay after school. My parents were teachers, so I have an affinity for teachers, who said, I'm going to stay after school and help you learn to read. Or a person in the community who noticed that they were living in a violent home, and were able to provide them some shelter, some encouragement, some safety in their lives. So, and I think so part of that also contributes to the school, the pipeline to prison, if you will, when we focus so much on punishment without putting a focus on prevention. And so we need to be getting to the root causes of crime. We need to be putting as much, if not more, energy into the root causes of trying to eliminate the desperation that leads to crime, than we do to the punishment as a result of the crime.
So how old was the young lady that wrote "hi" on somebody?
She was 9. Yeah, she was young.
And so, I mean, that seems, I mean, that seems silly to put someone in
It
a,
it does seem silly. It's really silly. Mm. But her parents wanted to prosecute, and the prosecutor didn't mind doing it. And so,
the young lady's parents wanted to prosecute because someone wrote on her sneakers.
yeah, I mean, I think the thing about it is like what I said earlier. Sometimes it's we don't put ourselves in other people's shoes. It's hard for us to consider our other people's points of view. I guess part of what we do, or what I had to do as a capital defense attorney, for example, is to help people to see there, but for the grace of God go I. Because we typically, as jurors, et cetera, we think, oh, that could never be me. I was raised right, or my mama taught me this thing, or whatever the thing is. And we think, oh, those people, so I don't have to have empathy for them because they're just different from me. And so what we have to do is break down that idea that this person is somehow less than we are, and that allows us not to care about them. I don't understand why people would have wasted our time and theirs trying to prosecute this little girl for that, but it is a thing that happened. And that's the kind of
life forever, regardless of the outcome. It would have changed her life forever.
And so we've had cases where we had to sue whole counties because they had one public defender for the whole county, and that meant that public defender could never show up for juvenile court. So you had children pleading guilty to crimes. So we had one one of our plaintiffs in our lawsuit, who stole a pair of fangs from Walmart, Halloween fangs, pled guilty to it, didn't realize that guilty plea would have an impact on their ability to go into the military, get scholarships for school, et cetera. And so we had to sue that county because it doesn't make any sense to you or I. But for some reason, the people operating this system thought it was perfectly okay for children to make these kinds of life decisions without the assistance of an attorney. And so
whose brains are completely formed. Oh my goodness.
Yes. And then, for things as minor as that, prosecutors have a lot of discretion, and it shocks me sometimes, like with that poor little 9-year-old girl, or with that boy who stole the fangs, that we couldn't have figured out a different way to handle and manage that.
Right. Now, although I honestly do believe, had they been white children, not Black children, there might have been a different outcome or resolution.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And, and I think that is true whether or not the white child was poor or wealthy. There just is a racial difference, even if poverty is the same, because there is unconscious or conscious different value placed on a person's life. And that doesn't mean whether or not you kill them, but it also means how we treat them in a system, whether we say, oh, I know their mom or dad, and I'm just gonna take them home and give them a stern warning, versus I'm willing to lock them up for this minor thing.
Hard to believe, and it's hard to believe that people who are educated and who are caring and loving people in all other walks of life, right, will allow this to happen. But I know it does happen. You've not had many.
Yeah, I mean, I've been so shocked, Kathy. I'm continually shocked at the ways that we come up with to treat people unjustly. We had a case in South Georgia where domestic violence victims were being prosecuted for not being willing to prosecute the perpetrator. So if you were to call 911, because you were being abused, and and police officer shows up, et cetera, et cetera. If you decided that you didn't no longer want to prosecute the case, you were fined and
For
threatened with
using
jail.
police officers' time, or?
Yes.
Okay.
And threatened with jail if you could not afford to pay the fine. And that seems just ridiculous to me. And it's hard for me to believe that anybody condoned that. But somebody made an argument that you're wasting police officers' time, and this is the way that we punish you for it. Mind you, these people are being regularly abused, right? And
right. So that's just further abuse. That's
the whole job of the police, is to protect and to serve. And so calling them out to protect you should not be a burden.
Yeah, that's
right?
their job. Right.
So, but that's just one example of things that feel obvious and still was allowed to happen by people you would think would know better.
Caring people. Okay. I knew this would be a tough one for me. Can you explain the whole private probation extortion that I read about on your website?
Yes. So we've had to sue private probation companies for tacking on additional fines and fees that the court didn't order, for example. And
the court
like
did not order. Okay.
Yeah. So they've tack on their own fines and fees, which was illegal. And as I said before, the folks who are most harmed by having to be on probation in this way were people who couldn't afford to pay the fine in the first place. And so those are some of the things that we've had to challenge that has occurred in Georgia, where they just really preying on people who have had no real ability to pay the original fine, but just because they, have this certain level of power over them, just continuing to push them further and further into poverty.
And so I remember you and I had a conversation once about, so there was this guy who had $100 fine or whatever. He couldn't pay it. I mean, he lived in a dilapidated house or whatever. And I said, why don't you find people who are willing to just pay his fine?
Yeah.
Right? And you said to me, because you don't want, because that just exacerbates it, and they continue to do it, right, as opposed to fighting it. So
yeah, so one, it's illegal. You're not supposed to lock people up because they're poor, but that's the reason why to sue these folks. But I said that that's what he ended up having to do, is beg other people to try to come up with some money to help him get out. He actually was locked up, get out of jail. And I think it's a bad practice to start paying for people to get out of jail, because it just perpetuates the system, because they figure it's okay to do because somebody else will handle it. And and that's not to say that the bail funds are not great, because I think they are great. But I think in situations like this, where it's not as simple as have somebody else do it, because what happens if somebody else cannot do it? We cannot find somebody to do it. And then what? I think what we have to focus on is this practice just? And if it's unjust, how do we stop it? Not how do we, sort of fit within this level of injustice? How do we sort of work around the injustice? No, what we're trying to do is stop the injustice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think that the case you're talking about was this man who had some limited mental health abilities, and he was impoverished, really, and lived in a rundown shack, didn't have running water in it, and got fined for burning leaves in his own yard. And instead of the court saying, sir, don't do that again, this is dangerous, you could have burned down your neighbors' homes, et cetera, and letting him go, it escalated to a level where we had to get involved to stop that process.
Wow. And there's one other story I want you to tell, and it's about the judge who wanted to be incentivized or paid more for the collection of fees and fines. If you could share that story.
Well, this gets into sort of some counties, a lot of the way the court is funded is through fines and fees, right? So folks get traffic tickets, whatever, they come to court, they have to pay a fine, whatever. That sort of creates a coffer of money that pays judges, it pays all of the people that work in the system. Mm-hmm. This particular judge had decided, well, shoot, I could just start tacking on some additional stuff and raise more money. And he did. And he also was so successful in it, he got bold enough to ask for a raise as a result. See how much money I raised for y'all? Not figuring damage that had been done to all of those people who had come before that court who had to pay those illegal fines and fees so that he could get a raise. So, that's another one of those examples of, I cannot believe this is true when it actually
very
is
much so true. Yeah, that is messed up. Okay, so then I was reading somewhere that the process of the bail reform had come to Atlanta. Okay, yes. What does that mean? What is, talk about the process of bail and why bail reform is even needed in the first place, and what does it mean that it's been reformed?
So the challenge with bail is that if you can pay to get out of jail, you get out of jail, and if you can't, you stay. And so that sets up an automatic injustice that sort of criminalizes people who cannot afford to pay it. Right. And so the reform I think that you were talking about was when Mayor Bottoms signed an ordinance that said that we would no longer require cash bail for certain misdemeanor offenses. And that was a reform. That was really a needed reform, because we had, like I said, that one client who had held up the sign, "Homeless, please help." He was a victim of that, where the bail was set at $200 and he just couldn't pay it. So he stayed in there, whereas somebody else who could have paid it was released. And so that's the challenge with the sort of cash bail, and that's why it was a victory for us. But we've, since that time, there have been efforts to roll back that. I think people are, and the process of bail is really to guarantee that somebody's going to show back up for court on their court day. And so, but there are people who are trying to roll back some of the gains that we had won related to bail reform. But it's just a big factor of the criminalization of poverty. Why is it that we think it's okay? Is a person less dangerous or less whatever because they have $200 and the other person doesn't?
Right.
What is it about the fact that they are able to pay this that makes you feel more confident that they'll be here than somebody who cannot afford to pay it?
So the $200 bail for that gentleman who clearly couldn't pay it. So it was an extraordinary amount for him. But would have somebody else who could afford to pay $200 have done it, would their bail have been $2,000? I mean, would it have been commensurate with, or would it still have been $200? I mean,
so it depends. There usually is like a scale for certain crimes. This is what the bail amount
is. Crime.
And so it likely would not have been $2,000.
Right.
Because we have plenty of people who are arrested for things who get $40,000 bails and that kind of thing. And it certainly is not taking into account their ability
Ability
to
to
be
pay
able to
it.
pay.
Right,
Mhm.
right, okay, but it
But
also
but
doesn't,
their lawyers, they have a lawyer can advocate for a reduction in bail based on their income, for sure.
okay, but it also doesn't mean that they're gonna show up. I mean, so somebody that, that can pay $200, that's not guaranteed that they're gonna show up. And that the person, only reason the person who can't pay it is guaranteed he's gonna show up is because he's sitting in jail. So
Right. Yeah.
it's
So it makes no sense.
no, it makes no sense. And the transient nature of somebody that's begging for food, right? The likelihood, I mean, what are they gonna do? Get themselves up that morning and go to court if they could have paid the 200? I mean, that's kind of crazy. The whole thing
Yeah.
makes no sense.
And I think, what people have found is that notification is really helpful in making sure that people show up. So, advocating for, can you text? Can we figure out a way to text people to say, hey, this is a reminder that you have a court date on
Right.
blah, 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 and please
Mhm.
show up at certain time. So we are trying to advocate for those kinds of innovations
Mhm.
that have been proven to work to make sure that people arrive on time.
But what about people who might lose their job because they had to take off of work to go to court? Because there's some employers that would not, well, they won't let you get stopped at boat. They still not let you go, get off to go to court.
Well, that's part of the criminalization. I mean, that is part of this whole system where the people who can least afford the consequences are the ones who suffer them.
Incredibly sad. So, all right, you've clearly been involved with the center for a long time. You've held many roles. You've outside of the center, you do incredible work around, around the legal system and trying to make it just. Can you tell us, how did you get involved with this work? How did you get involved with the center?
Well, it's a long story, so I'll try to make it short. I was a student in college, and I got a summer research fellowship at the American Bar Foundation in Chicago. And part of that fellowship, the idea was to teach, expose students, minority students, to law and social policy. So we got paired with people who were researching around that. But the thing that sort of made me think about the criminal legal system different was, as a part of that program, we took a tour of the Cook County Jail. It was my first time being in a jail. I did not know what to expect, and I did not feel comfortable. Not because I was afraid. I didn't feel comfortable because I didn't feel right gawking at people who were in cages. And they didn't have the autonomy to be able to say to me, look away. That just didn't sit well with me. And so I was on the tour sort of feeling that. And then I looked around and was like, wait, why did almost everybody that I see look just like me? And that was the first time that I said, there's something not quite right here. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't quite understand like the racism in the system and how people of color are targeted, particularly Black people. But it was something that stuck with me as I went to law school. But the thing that really got me on that tour was that there were some law students who were interning in the summer for those large law firms, and they asked the officers to make the people incarcerated fight for their entertainment.
No.
Same thing I said. No, I couldn't believe it. I was horrified. And I was horrified having grown up in Mississippi, sort of like, you do the crime, you do the time. That was kind of the way I was raised up. And so, and even I, having that sort of background, heard that request and thought, my God, they think so little of the people who are incarcerated here that they are willing, that they think it's okay to ask for people incarcerated to harm themselves for their entertainment. couldn't get over the inhumanity in it, but also couldn't get past the power in it, because they were going to be lawyers. And think what you want about lawyers. I think lawyers are great. Having a law degree confers a certain level of power and respect in the community. And so I thought to myself, you have these folks who will have a certain level of power in their communities, and this is what they think about people who are incarcerated. And mind you, this is a jail. A lot of people hadn't even been convicted of anything. There's some people who would not have been convicted of anything. There are people who are in there just because they couldn't afford to get out. Just like I said, they might have been in there because they were loitering or whatever. But the fact that they were incarcerated made them inhuman to those law students. And I just couldn't get that thought out of my head. And so I took all those things to law school and started wanting to think more about the criminal legal system. I volunteered with the Virginia Capital Representation Resource Center doing death penalty work. So I got to interview witnesses and watch folks cry and interview jurors and see like doubt. And the more I learned about the system, the more I learned about the death penalty in particular, the angrier I became. I was really angry about the racism and classism. And like, we don't kill people who are wealthy. That's just not what we do. No matter what they do in life, our government does not kill wealthy people or powerful people. And so those kinds of things just made me angry. And I just decided that this is what I wanted to do with my life. And now that was not a good, easy decision, because my parents were teachers. We weren't wealthy, but we were middle class, Mississippi middle class. But I was the first lawyer in my family, still am the only lawyer. And when I went to law school, I didn't know that there was such thing as public interest pay versus law firm pay versus whatever the thing. I just thought all lawyers were fairly well off or wealthy. That was just because I hadn't been exposed enough. And so it was a struggle for me to choose this work where when I had a large law firm offer paying substantially more, to tell my parents that I was going to come out of law school after working so hard and make $30,000. They were like, wait, huh? What are we doing right now? So my mom said, Terica, when you go to pay your tuition, can you pay it with love? Can you pay it with compassion? No, it takes MONEY. So she just did not understand. But now they're all like, oh, you're like Angela Davis, and they're all so proud. But I ended up, I just chose me. I knew that I wanted to use my talents to support people who needed those talents the most. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the death penalty field, just generally. And then I came to the Southern Center because, at the time that I was coming out of law school, if you wanted to do death penalty work, the Southern Center was the model for where to do it. So that's how I came to the Southern Center. Why I stay is because I love the people. I feel really good about supporting the people that we serve, but I also feel it feels like a privilege to be in a place where I can work with people that I absolutely respect and admire. And so, I just feel good about the mission. I feel good about the people that we're working with, and I feel love for the people that we're working for.
Wow. So then how do you get this next generation interested in this type of work? How do you motivate the next Terica to come work there?
I think it's easier now, really, because I think, so when I started way back in the day, people weren't talking about criminal justice the way they're talking about it now. Okay. It was kind of a sort of taboo thing to talk about. You wouldn't, corporations would not have been caught associating with an organization that represented people on death row. And with Black Lives Matter movement and racial uprisings, I think people are paying attention to the criminal legal system in ways that they haven't before. And I think young people are outraged and wanting to do something
Yeah.
in ways that they probably haven't ever, in ways that they haven't been for a long time. But I also think that, for example, law schools are making it easier for students to choose this work by, excuse me, providing loan forgiveness so that you don't come out of law school with $100,000 in loans and then have to take a public interest job, right? So they're making it easier for folks to choose this work. But I think, the way to recruit people is to, have conversations with them, let them see what it looks like to be able to do this work. I remember when I was a law student and really trying to decide what to do. I spoke with excuse me, a justice on the Maine Supreme Court, and she had chosen public interest too. And she said to me, Terica, choose your passion, because if you choose your passion, you'll do well and everything else will follow. And I trusted her. And so those are the same words that I share with other students who are considering what to do with their lives. And maybe it's not criminal defense, but I just really think that life is too short. And I think that to the extent that you have an affinity for doing this kind of work, then I think you should choose you, and create a legacy that you can be proud of.
Right. So then, because this work seems like it's incredibly hard. I mean, the sadness that you must encounter, the difficulty, how do you keep your staff motivated?
That's not hard for our particular staff. The motivation is not the thing that is a challenge, because people have chosen this work on purpose. They are absolutely committed to doing it. The burnout is the thing that we have to be careful around. And it's been a hard pandemic few years, right? With our work almost doubling in size in terms of the pressure around it, the urgency around it, and also us feeling it too, right? So as we're doing the work, we're also impacted by the pandemic. We're also impacted by racial injustice. And so it's just been really, really tough. And so what we've just tried to be really intentional around saying to people, you need to take a break, right? And put it on your calendar and show it to me. And then I want you to not be on this email, right? Thinking about ways we've had given out little stipends, self-care stipends that says, look, do a thing that makes you happy, whether that means get a massage, whether that means go to a play, whatever it means, do that thing, because we know that this has been hard for you, for all of us. And so we've been really trying to be intentional around taking care of our people, and making sure that they take care of themselves.
Right. I remember for Criminal Justice Day at Leadership Atlanta, we heard how there are people who have been in jail awaiting a trial. I mean, they're not even been tried, convicted, or anything yet, right? For over a year at this point, which was, and it was bad before the pandemic, but exacerbated by the pandemic, right? And so, and then we saw some, public defenders, right, who were, I mean, amazingly overworked.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and so do you all get involved in helping people get a public defender, or do you act as that public defender? I mean, what is?
Well, no and yes. We get involved when it's bad.
Okay.
So when it gets to a place where we have to sue folks, we have to file a class action lawsuit on behalf of a number of people who are encountering the system and not getting the kind of representation that they need. And so that's the level where we sort of engage
Okay.
there, but we don't go in and act as public
Yes.
defenders for folks.
So I have spared our audience because we have heard some incredibly sad, terrible things that have happened to people in jail, and I've spared them all of those, the worst stories, right, that we've heard about pregnant women and all these other things that we heard about at Leadership Atlanta. But how do you know, or okay, are you making progress, and how do you know if you are?
Yes, we're definitely making progress, even if it doesn't feel like it, because sometimes we can look at the system and it's wide and big and the justices are large, just expansive. But we know, so there are a number of ways we know that we're making progress. One, when systems start changing, right? So like we were able to sue to get, lethal, to get the electric chair removed. We were able to sue, or, we filed like, I don't know, 6 lawsuits across the state. And those lawsuits, along with our policy advocacy, helped to institute a public defender system in Georgia where there was none. Previous to that, there are just sort of haphazard, any kind of lawyer could take any of these cases, and you might be a real estate lawyer, but you could take a criminal anyway. So that's systems change that we can look back on and say, yep, that worked. When we sue counties and they stopped doing the things that we had to sue them for, those are some of the measures that we can take in terms that feel systemic. But I think success is also measured on the individual level. And that might mean that we've gotten this person who had been serving life without parole for this much of drugs, a little fingertip worth of drugs based on our 3 strikes you're outlaw, getting them released. Now it might be that we were able to get that person released, but it also might mean that we were able to be a friend to a person who was facing the ultimate punishment. And that's a success too, because for folks who don't have a lot of people who are willing to stand up for them, who are willing to be there for them, to be a friend to them, that's a win too. And so I think there are a number of ways that we measure success. Some of them are systemic wins, like, helping to create bail reform in the city of Atlanta. But others are just, was I able to be present and fight for this person? Sometimes a win might even be for people who call our office, a mama who might call, or sister or brother or whoever. And they might say, I called a lot of places, but you were the first place that listened to me. And maybe you can't do anything, but I really appreciate you. And so that's a win, because that has created, that has helped that person feel different about the system. It has helped them feel heard and validated, and that's a win too. So we measure success in a lot of different ways, and sometimes they're huge in people's minds, and sometimes it's the small things that feel the best.
So we do have a question. Can the bad actors in these private correctional facilities, or the people who charge fees to raise money, be sued under 42 USC 1983 for civil rights violations?
Yes, that's what I mean. That's a lot of what we do in terms of our class action litigation. We have an impact litigation unit, and a lot of what we do is filing civil rights class actions against bad actors who are creating environments that are harmful. I mean, we've had places that, prisons, for example, that their locks just didn't work. So folks could go in and out of cells at their leisure. And we had this, I can't even say this. It's so horrible, I can't even say out loud. So I won't tell you what happened, but it was just really a travesty. And, when the folks who were in charge knew that there was a problem and they decided not to do anything anyway, those are the kinds of things that we come in and we try to fix through our lawsuits. And, so a lot of times, they stop that practice, but, part of the frustrating thing that we deal with on a regular basis is figuring out, but how do we stop having to file these lawsuits?
Right.
What can we do to stop that? And so those are the questions that we're asking ourselves as we, think about our strategic vision for the next 5 years is how do we get to the root of some of these problems so that we stop having to go to the same places multiple different times.
So I hope you saw that in the chat, the person who asked that question also commended you for the work that you do. So yeah, I want to make sure you saw that. So, my final question is, what is it would you ask of us to do? What would you ask of the, just ordinary people who don't do what you do for a living? What can we do to help?
I think there are a number of things that you can do. One, I think, is doing what you do now, what you're doing tonight is listening, hearing, learning, figuring out where the issues are. And then I think the next thing to do is to raise your voice. And maybe you're raising your voice may mean having conversations with your friends or your coworkers and asking them questions and sort of helping them to learn more about the system. Because I think the thing that I've heard multiple different times is, wow, if I had known about your organization earlier, I would have been supporting you earlier. Or wow, I didn't know that things were this bad. And so I think the more people are educated about what the problems are in the system, the less willing they are to tolerate them.
Right.
And I think that allows them to contact their representatives. It allows them to write op-eds, things like that, that allow that one give their representatives cover to do the right thing. Because a lot of times, folks might say, well, I can't vote for that law, or I can't not, whatever the thing is, because my constituents say this and that. But as constituents, you can tell your representatives, actually, this is really important to me, and this is how I need you to think about it. Donate to organizations that are doing the work on the ground. So not everybody can do the work that we do, but you can support it. You can, when we send out calls to action that says, hey, we need you to take action on this thing, you can sign up for the email list and take the action that we're asking you to do. So I think, there are small things. So a lot of times people think, oh, I have to do this big thing. No, I think you can do a small thing and make a huge difference, because the people who are supporting the work that we do are supporting all the people who get free, right? When those folks get free, they got free because people gave us the resources to do the advocacy we needed to do to help them advocate for their own freedom. When a person's life is saved, and we get to the Supreme Court and we win before the United States Supreme Court, we were able to get there because there were people who cared enough that said, I can't be the lawyer to do this work, but I sure can support those folks. And so I think there are a number of different ways, and I would start with just learning more, educating yourself, and then spreading the word, because we see the power of outrage. I think when people just get fed up, then I think systems start changing.
Well, I'm grateful that you, first of all, you do the work that you do, and you are amazing at it. And I've learned so much about you through this whole process, not just Leadership Atlanta, but this process tonight. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for talking about all the work that you do. It's so important, and I appreciate the fact that you do it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being with you tonight.
Thank you. And thank all of you all for joining us tonight. This was the last of the series that we started so long ago. And I can't think of a better way to have ended it with Terica here explaining what she does and how we can all do small things or whatever we're capable of doing to help in support of her mission. So thank you all for joining us. And I hope you've enjoyed our series. And thank you all for participating in all of our series. And I would say good night. Thank you, Terica. Good night.